Hello. Now, have you thought about the vaccine ID card? Because in some form it's going to come in. And the problem with ID cards, as most countries across Europe have found, is that they're actually very convenient for governments. And yes, people can say, oh, it's very convenient for me. I can, with my ID card, immediately all my information is there. But one of the big issues for our country, for Britain, is that we had a sort of rebellion against ID cards in the early 1950s, and a rebellion against this idea that the police can stop us and ask us for our identity and ask us to produce our ID card without any suspicion that a crime has been committed, and not producing that would be a crime. Now, we had ID cards in the UK. They were here's one here. I was going to say they were sort of brown or buff in the buff, but this one's rather green. So the green ones were for government officials, and eventually they ended up. There was sort of blue version in 1942. That sounds like a sort of version for Matt Hancock. Ooh, a blue version. Ooh, missus. And anyway, they came in with the National Registration Act in 1939 on the 29th of September. And the idea was that you had to carry them and produce them if the police asked you to, or produce them in a police station within 48 hours. And the ID card helped to introduce rationing when it came in 1940. But it was repealed in 1952 on February the 21st. And partly because juries were failing to convict people for not carrying it. Actually, the last person who was who faced a court case for not carrying his ID card was Harry Wilcock. His last words, famously, shortly after he was convicted, was freedom. It was like it was like Mel Gibson, and he was caught speeding on Ballards Lane in North Finchley. We actually know the policeman who caught him, Constable Harold Mucky, and he demanded his card. And Harry Wilcox said, "I'm a Liberal, and I stand against this sort of thing." And he was given an absolute discharge in the court case, but fined 30 shillings for speeding. Now, Lord Goddard, because he then took the case further, and he appealed the sentence, stain on my character. Lord Goddard criticised the ID card as a concept and said that the ID card, when it was passed, it's now being used for purposes for which it was never apparently intended, because the ID card had become convenient to the Attlee government. And so when Churchill stood in 1951, he campaigned partly on the principle that he would abolish the ID card and set the people free. It's true, it was abolished, but the ID card details, the number was used as the basis for the NHS number and the basis for the national insurance number, and it still had a life beyond its abolition. And then a few years ago, Labour wanted to revive the ID card, and it was killed off by Mrs. May, in 2010. And part of that was because there was a revelation, news of huge data leaks all over the place. Today, with the vaccine ID card, which I think if it comes in will probably linger for quite some time, how would this function? Would it be a sort of fingerprint ID card? Would it be facial recognition? There are both in the world. We're looking about it. So it may not necessarily be that you have to carry a card with you. And actually, the other thing is, we think Britain is sort of generally opposed to ID cards, but we've actually introduced them. We were responsible, the British were responsible for introducing ID cards in Hong Kong. And actually in 1980, I think, 1986, I can't remember. We went to the Netherlands, and we got the Netherlands to produce a special Hong Kong card with a new microchip in it. But yeah, we rolled that out. So it would be hypocritical of us to take a moral stand and say we're against ID cards because we've actually imposed them on other people. I don't know what you think about ID cards. I don't know what you think about sort of carrying proof of vaccination. I fear it's inevitable in some form. But what form that takes, I'm sure there'll be a little fudge where we say one thing and do another, because that seems to be the nature of Boris's government. All that for another time. Do follow my channel and do ring the bell, and see you soon. Bye bye.